The quiet of the evening settled over our little suburban street like a soft blanket, the kind you'd pull tight on a chilly fall night. From the kitchen window, I could see the last streaks of sunset painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, the silhouettes of maple trees swaying gently in the breeze. It was a view I'd come to love over the years, a steady comfort after long days shelving books and helping patrons at the library. But tonight, as I turned the key in the front door of our two-story home, that comfort felt distant, replaced by an odd stillness that hung in the air. I'd left work earlier than usual, the weight of overdue reports and a spilled coffee incident driving me to seek the refuge of my own space. I half expected to hear the familiar strum of Lucas's guitar drifting down the hall. He'd taken to practicing late into the evening since starting college. Or maybe the muffled roar of a football game on the TV, his sneakers kicked off by the couch. Instead, the house was silent, save for the faint creak of the hardwood beneath my flats as I stepped inside. The living room was dark, the curtains drawn tight, but a thin sliver of light peeked out from beneath the den door down the hall. My stomach tightened. A flicker of worry, maybe even suspicion, nudging me forward. "Lucas?" I called softly, my voice barely above a whisper, as if I didn't really want an answer. Nothing came back but the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I set my purse on the entry table, the leather strap brushing against my knuckles, and crept toward the den. The door was ajar, just enough to let that warm glow spill across the floorboards. I pressed my palm against the wood, easing it open, half expecting to find him asleep with a textbook splayed across his chest. What I saw instead stopped me cold. There, sprawled across the old leather recliner we'd bought at a garage sale years ago, was Lucas. His lean frame was relaxed, legs stretched out, but there was a tension in him, a quiet intensity that hit me like a gust of wind. The TV flickered, casting a soft, shifting light over his face, sharp jawline, dark hair tousled from a day of classes. His hand was tucked beneath the waistband of his gray sweatpants, moving with a steady rhythm, the fabric stretched tight over the unmistakable outline of his arousal. My breath caught in my throat, sharp and jagged, as the reality of it sank in. Lucas, my stepson, the gangly kid I'd helped raise since he was 14, was lost in a moment so private, so raw, that I felt like an intruder in my own home. For a split second, I couldn't move. My eyes darted from the flex of his wrist to the way his chest rose and fell, quick and shallow, under his faded t-shirt. The sheer size of him, evident even through the cloth, was startling, a blunt reminder that he wasn't the boy who'd once needed me to tie his shoes. Shock washed over me, hot and prickly, mingling with something else I couldn't name, something that made my cheeks burn and my pulse hammer in my ears. He didn't see me. His eyes were half closed, lips parted just enough to let out a low, ragged breath that snapped me out of my daze. I stepped back, careful not to let the floor creak, and pulled the door shut as quietly as I could. My heart pounded like a drum, each beat a reprimand for standing there even a moment too long. The hallway stretched out before me, endless and heavy, as I made my way to my bedroom. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it, the cool wood pressing into my spine like an anchor. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the buttons of my cardigan, shedding it onto the chair by the window. Outside, the streetlights blinked on one by one, indifferent to the storm churning inside me. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the quilt soft beneath my fingers, and stared at the familiar lines of my room. The bookshelf crammed with novels, the framed photo of me and Lucas at his high school graduation. That image felt like a lie now, a snapshot of a simpler time before tonight cracked it wide open. What I'd seen replayed in my mind. The way his hand moved, the unguarded pleasure etched across his face. It was a side of him I'd never known, one that stirred a tangle of emotions I didn't want to untangle. Not yet. I kicked off my shoes, the thud of them hitting the floor too loud in the silence, and crawled under the covers. The sheets were cool against my skin, but they offered no relief from the heat still simmering beneath my ribs. I closed my eyes, willing sleep to come, but Lucas's silhouette lingered behind my lids, a shadow I couldn't shake. The bedroom door clicked shut behind me, sealing me into a space that had always been my refuge. Tonight, though, it felt different, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for me to make sense of what I'd just seen. I crossed to the window, my bare feet sinking into the plush rug, and tugged the curtains aside. The street outside glowed under the soft hum of sodium lights, each one a tiny beacon in the growing dark. It was a sight that usually steadied me, a reminder of the world turning on beyond these four walls. But now, it only sharpened the chaos swirling in my chest. I let the curtain fall back, the fabric whispering against my fingers, and turned to the bed. The quilt was still rumpled from this morning, a careless oversight in my rush to get to work. I smoothed it out with shaky hands, then sat, the mattress dipping beneath me. My mind wouldn't settle. Every time I tried to push it away, Lucas's image surged back, vivid and unyielding. The way his hand had moved, deliberate and sure, the faint sheen of sweat on his brow catching the TV's flickering light. He was no longer the lanky teenager who'd sulked through family dinners. He'd grown into something else, someone else, a man whose presence filled the room in ways I hadn't noticed until tonight. My throat tightened as I unbuttoned my blouse, letting it slip to the floor in a soft heap. The air was cool against my skin, raising goosebumps along my arms, but it did nothing to douse the heat creeping up my neck. I climbed into bed, pulling the sheets up to my chin like a shield. But the darkness only amplified what I couldn't unsee. Lucas, sprawled in the recliner, lost in himself. My fingers brushed the edge of the blanket, then hesitated. "This is wrong," I whispered into the quiet, my voice swallowed by the shadows. He was my stepson, had been since I married his father 8 years ago, since I'd bandaged his scraped knees and cheered at his soccer games. Yet here I was, my thoughts betraying every boundary I'd ever set. I shifted, the sheets rustling, and let my hand drift lower, tracing the familiar curve of my hip. It was a habit, a quiet comfort on restless nights, but tonight it felt different. Loaded, dangerous. My breath hitched as my mind slipped, unbidden, to Lucas. What if it were his hand instead of mine, calloused from strumming that guitar, brushing against me with the same focus I'd seen in the den? The thought sent a shiver racing down my spine, sharp and electric, igniting a warmth that pooled low in my belly. I pressed my thighs together, trying to stop it, but the ache only deepened, insistent and alive. "Grace, stop it," I muttered, rolling onto my side, the pillow cool against my cheek. But the words were hollow, a flimsy dam against a rising tide. My hand moved again, tentative at first, then bolder, following the contours of my body like a map I'd long memorized. Each touch was a betrayal, a step further from the woman I thought I was. The widow, the stepmother, the one who kept everything in its place. Lucas's low moan echoed in my memory, soft and unguarded, and I imagined it closer, his breath warm against my ear. My fingers quickened, chasing the release I didn't want to name, the one I couldn't outrun. It came fast, a wave crashing over me, sharp and blinding. My gasp broke the silence, ragged and raw, as my body trembled beneath the sheets. For a moment, I floated there, suspended in the afterglow, the room spinning softly around me. Then the weight settled in, guilt, thick and heavy, wrapping around my chest like a vice. I pulled my hand away, curling it into a fist, and stared at the ceiling. The shadows danced above me, mocking the line I'd just crossed in my own head. I turned onto my stomach, burying my face in the pillow, willing the thoughts to fade. But they clung to me, stubborn and vivid, like the scent of rain on asphalt after a storm. Lucas's form, strong, real, alive, had shattered something in me, something I'd kept locked away since his father passed. The boy I'd raised was gone, replaced by a man whose vulnerability had undone me in ways I couldn't explain. Sleep hovered just out of reach, taunting me with its promise of escape, but the night stretched on, endless and restless. The house creaked around me, a silent witness to the turmoil I couldn't quiet, and I knew morning would come too soon, bringing Lucas and me face to face across a divide I wasn't sure I could bridge. The kitchen smelled of frying eggs and toasted bread. a familiar ritual that usually grounded me as the sun crept over the horizon. I stood at the stove, the sizzle of butter in the pan, a steady hum against the quiet of the house. Outside, the neighborhood stirred, lawnmowers buzzing faintly, a dog barking down the street. But inside, it was just me and the weight of last night pressing down like a stone. I flipped the eggs, the yolk trembling, and tried to focus on the task, on the normalcy of it all. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking, the spatula slipping slightly in my grip. Footsteps thudded on the stairs, slow and deliberate, and my stomach twisted. Lucas shuffled into the kitchen, his hoodie pulled low over his eyes, hands shoved deep into the pockets. His dark hair stuck out in messy tufts, and the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw caught the morning light streaming through the window. "Morning," he mumbled, heading straight for the coffee pot. The mug clinked against the counter as he poured, the sound sharp in the stillness. "Good morning, Lucas," I said, keeping my voice even, though my pulse thrummed in my ears. I slid the eggs onto a plate, adding a slice of toast, and set it on the table. He grabbed the mug and slumped into a chair, his knee bouncing under the table. For a moment, we moved in silence, me wiping the counter, him sipping his coffee. Two people pretending the air wasn't thick with something unspoken. "How's school going?" I asked, leaning against the sink, my arms crossed tight over my chest. It was a safe question, a lifeline to normal conversation. He shrugged, taking a bite of toast before answering. "Fine. Got a history project due next week. It's about the Civil War. Kinda interesting, I guess." His words came out clipped, his eyes fixed on the plate. I nodded, forcing a smile, though my mind was elsewhere, replaying the flicker of the TV, the curve of his hand. "That sounds like a lot of work. You managing okay?" I pressed, needing the rhythm of his voice to anchor me. He launched into a ramble about battle strategies and library books, and I listened, nodding at the right moments, but my gaze kept drifting. The way his shoulders filled out that hoodie, broader than I remembered, the flex of his fingers around the mug, strong and sure. Last night had stripped away the boy I'd known, leaving a man in his place, and I couldn't unsee it. The words came before I could stop them. "Lucas, before you go, there's something I need to say." My voice was steady, but my chest fluttered like a trapped bird. He froze, the mug halfway to his lips, and looked up at me, his hazel eyes wide with a flicker of unease. "Yeah?" he said, setting the coffee down, his fingers tightening around the handle. I took a deep breath, the air cool in my lungs. "Last night, I got home earlier than I planned. I didn't mean to, but I walked in on something private in the den." The color drained from his face, his jaw going slack as the realization hit. I pushed on, softer now. "I saw you, Lucas, and I'm not upset or judging you. It's okay. It's natural, part of being who you are." He stared at the table, his shoulders hunching, like he wanted to disappear into the wood. You saw that?" His voice was a rough whisper, barely audible over the hum of the fridge. I nodded, stepping closer, my hands clasped tight to keep them still. "Yes, and I mean it. It's nothing to be ashamed of. You're young, healthy. It's normal." I paused, watching the flush creep up his neck. "But I know it can feel lonely, keeping that to yourself. So I was thinking if you ever wanted, I could be there. Not to intrude, just to make it less isolating. A safe space, maybe." His head snapped up, eyes locking onto mine, a mix of shock and something else, curiosity maybe, flickering in them. "You're serious?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. I offered a small, reassuring smile, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. "Only if you're okay with it. No pressure, just something to think about." He blinked at me, his mouth opening then closing, like he couldn't find the words. The silence stretched, heavy and charged, until he finally muttered, I'll think about it. This is a lot." "Of course," I said, stepping back to give him room. "Take your time." He nodded, pushing his chair back with a scrape, and grabbed his plate, dumping it in the sink. As he shuffled out, backpack slung over one shoulder, I watched him go, the space between us buzzing with questions neither of us was ready to answer. The house felt too big after Lucas left, the echo of his footsteps fading into a stillness that pressed against my ears. I stood in the kitchen, the breakfast dishes stacked in the sink, the coffee pot still warm under my fingers. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, catching specks of dust in the air, but it couldn't chase away the weight of our morning talk. I'd thrown something fragile into the open, my words hanging there like a thread pulled taut, waiting to snap or hold. Had I gone too far? Offered too much? The question gnawed at me as I rinsed the plates, the water hot against my skin. I moved through the day on autopilot, wiping counters that didn't need it, folding laundry that could have waited. The living room rug bore the faint indent of Lucas's sneakers from last night, and I vacuumed it away, trying to erase the memory of what I'd seen. But it clung to me, his silhouette in the den, the rawness of it, the way it had stirred something I couldn't name. Was I trying to help him? Or was this about me? The thought twisted in my gut, sharp and accusing, but beneath it was a flicker of anticipation I couldn't smother. By afternoon, the house was spotless, a flimsy shield against the restlessness building inside. I sank onto the couch, the cushions sighing under me, and stared at the blank TV screen. Lucas would be home soon. His history class ended at 4, then the 20-minute drive back. What would he say? Would he brush it off, pretend I'd never spoken, or would he take the leap I'd dangled before him? My fingers drummed against my thigh, the rhythm uneven, as I replayed our conversation. His shock, his hesitation, they'd been real. But so had that spark in his eyes, faint but undeniable. The clock ticked toward evening, the shadows stretching long across the hardwood. I hauled myself up, needing something to do, and headed to the kitchen. Dinner would ground me, something hearty, familiar. I pulled a steak from the fridge, the meat cold and firm under my hands, and set it on the counter. Potatoes went into a pot, the water bubbling as I mashed them later, the scent of butter and salt filling the air. It was a meal we'd shared 100 times, Lucas and me, since his dad passed. Simple, steady, a tether to the life we'd built. Tonight, though, it felt like a stage being set. The front door creaked open just as I slid the steak into the oven. Lucas stepped in, his backpack thudding to the floor, his hoodie swapped for a flannel shirt that hugged his shoulders. "Smells good," he said, his voice casual, but his eyes cautious, darting to mine then away. I smiled, wiping my hands on a towel, and nodded toward the table. "Steak and mashed potatoes. Hungry?" He grunted a yes, kicking off his shoes, and we fell into the routine, plates clinking, forks scraping, the oven's heat warming the room. We talked about his day, his professor's rant about Gettysburg, but the words felt like placeholders, skirting the real thing hovering between us. I watched him cut into the steak, his hand steady, and waited. He set his fork down halfway through, leaning back in his chair, his gaze finally meeting mine. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low, like he was testing the waters, "about this morning, what you said." My heart lurched, but I kept my face calm, nodding for him to go on. I'm willing to try it, but we need rules, clear ones." Relief washed over me, cool and sudden, followed by a rush of resolve. "Of course," I said, leaning forward, my hands clasped on the table. "We'll take it slow, make sure it's right for both of us. What do you need?" He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing, and ran a hand through his hair. "Tomorrow night," he said. "After dinner. And I call the shots. If I say stop, we stop. You're just there, okay? Watching, like you said." His cheeks flushed, but his eyes held steady, a quiet strength in them that made my chest ache. "Tomorrow night," I agreed, my voice soft but firm. "You're in control, Lucas. Always. We'll figure it out together." He nodded, a small, tight movement, and picked up his fork again, digging back into the potatoes. The rest of the meal passed in a subdued hum, the air thick with what we'd settled on. A pact, fragile and strange, but ours. As he cleared his plate and headed upstairs, I stayed behind, the kitchen dimming around me. Tomorrow loomed close now. A promise and a risk. And I knew sleep wouldn't come easy tonight. The kitchen glowed warm under the soft lights, the scent of roasted chicken and rosemary weaving through the air like a quiet promise. I'd spent the afternoon fussing over the meal, rubbing herbs into the bird, slicing carrots and parsnips to roast alongside it, tossing a salad with crisp greens and a light vinaigrette. It was more effort than usual, a distraction from the nervous hum in my veins. But now, as I set the table, it felt right. The clink of plates against the wood steadied me, a small anchor in the tide of what was coming. Lucas came down just as I pulled the chicken from the oven, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. He'd swapped his flannel for a clean black t-shirt, his hair still damp from a shower, curling slightly at the ends. "Looks good," he said, sliding into his seat, his voice carrying that easy tone he used to mask whatever churned beneath. I smiled, pouring us each a glass of red wine. Nothing fancy, just a bottle I'd grabbed from the pantry, and sat across from him. "Thanks. How was your day?" I asked, spearing a carrot with my fork. He shrugged, cutting into the chicken, and launched into a story about a classmate botching a presentation. We kept it light, his words, my nods, the occasional laugh, like any other night. But there was an edge to it, a current running under our small talk. I caught it in the way his eyes flicked to mine, quick and knowing, then darted away. "You're in a mood tonight," I teased, sipping my wine, letting a playful lilt creep into my voice. He grinned, a flash of teeth that softened his face. "It's not every night we do this, is it?" The words hung there, light but loaded, and we both laughed. A shared release, easing the knot in my chest. We lingered over the meal, the wine loosening our edges, the conversation drifting to safer shores. A book I'd mentioned, a concert he wanted to see. But as the plates emptied, the air shifted, heavy with what we'd agreed to. After clearing the table, we moved to the living room. I dimmed the lights with a flick of the switch, the room softening into a wash of shadows and amber glow from the lamps. The couch beckoned, its worn cushions familiar, and Lucas sank into one end, his knees spread wide. I settled beside him, close but not touching, my hands folded in my lap. "Ready?" I asked, my voice a whisper, gentle but firm, a final check. He nodded, his eyes locking onto mine, raw and unguarded. "Yeah," he said, his voice steady, despite the slight tremor in it. He took a deep breath, his chest rising, then reached for the hem of his shirt. The fabric slid up and over his head, revealing the lean planes of his torso, muscle honed from pickup games and restless energy, a faint scattering of hair across his chest. My breath caught, a quiet hitch I hoped he didn't hear, as he unbuttoned his jeans next. They hit the floor with a soft thud, leaving him in dark boxer briefs, the fabric taut against the swell of him. "You comfortable?" I murmured, keeping my gaze soft, searching his face for any sign of doubt. He met my eyes, a flicker of vulnerability there, and nodded again. "Yes." With that, he leaned back, the couch creaking under his weight, and closed his eyes. His hands rested on his thighs for a moment, fingers flexing, then moved to the waistband of his briefs. He paused, as if gathering himself, before sliding them down, freeing himself completely. I watched, my heart thudding hard against my ribs as his hand wrapped around his length. The first stroke was slow, deliberate, shadows playing across his skin in the dim light. His breathing deepened, a rhythm I could feel in the air between us, and I sat still, a silent witness to his private dance. The room shrank to just him, the flex of his arm, the tightening of his jaw, the way his chest rose and fell faster with each passing minute. It was intimate, tender in its rawness, a trust laid bare. His pace quickened, a low sound escaping his throat, and I saw the tension coil in his thighs, his stomach. When it hit, his body arched slightly, a shudder running through him, his breath ragged and sharp. He stilled, chest heaving, then opened his eyes, turning to me. The look he gave me was open, unguarded, a mirror to the ache in my own chest. "Stay," he said, his voice soft, his hand reaching out to circle my wrist. His touch was warm, electric, and I froze, caught between the boundary we'd set and the pull of his plea. I hesitated, then nodded, sliding closer on the couch, the space between us shrinking to nothing. "Okay," I whispered, my voice trembling just enough to betray me. His grip loosened, but he didn't let go, and we sat there, the silence humming with what we'd just shared and what might come next.